I never expected that a broken dryer and a sudden downpour would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. Before that afternoon, my world was a small, carefully curated collection of routines. It was safe, it was predictable, and it was, if I'm being completely honest with myself, profoundly lonely. My name is Lucas, and my apartment was my fortress. From its windows, I watched the world go by, a passive observer in my own story. My days had a rhythm that rarely broke. Wake up, brew coffee that was probably a little too strong, and settle in at my desk by the window for a day of web development. The view wasn't spectacular, just a slice of a quiet, tree-lined street and the brick facade of the building opposite mine. But it was my slice. It was where I saw the seasons change, where I watched neighbors walk their dogs, and where I first started noticing him. Julian. He lived in the apartment directly above mine, 3B. I didn't know his name at first, of course. He was just the guy upstairs. He was a man defined by sounds before he was ever a person. The heavy, confident tread of his work boots on the ceiling above my head in the morning. The faint, rhythmic thump of music in the evenings. The occasional scrape of a piece of furniture being moved, which always made me wonder what he was doing, what his life looked like up there. Then I started seeing him. In the lobby, by the mailboxes, or hauling groceries up the stairs. He was everything I wasn't. He seemed so effortlessly present in the world, so comfortable in his own skin. He worked in construction, I think, or maybe carpentry. He'd often come home in the late afternoon with a fine layer of sawdust clinging to his dark hair and a smudge of something on his cheek, looking tired but satisfied. He had broad shoulders and strong hands, hands that looked like they knew how to build things, how to fix what was broken. And he always smiled. It was just a small, polite nod and a smile at first, the kind you give any neighbor you pass in the hall. "Hey," he'd say, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. And I'd murmur something back, my eyes probably flicking away too quickly. He radiated a kind of warm, uncomplicated confidence that I found both intimidating and deeply magnetic. In my head, I had built a whole life for him. A life that included a pretty girlfriend, a group of loud friends he watched sports with, and a complete, blissful ignorance of his quiet, anxious neighbor in 2B. He was, to me, a fixed point in another universe, one I could observe but never, ever enter. That's how life works sometimes, isn't it? You build walls around yourself and then decorate them with pictures of a world you're too afraid to step into. Julian was the most prominent picture on my wall. I'd find myself timing my trips to the laundry room or to take out the trash, hoping for a chance to see him, a chance for another one of those 2-second interactions that I would then spend the next hour dissecting. It was a pathetic little habit, but it was mine. He was a bright spot of predictable unpredictability in my otherwise monochrome existence. The building we lived in was old, with the kind of charm that really just meant things were constantly breaking. The plumbing groaned, the floors creaked, and the single washer and dryer in the basement were locked in a perpetual feud with the tenants. The dryer, in particular, was a fickle beast. Sometimes it worked perfectly. Other times, it would accept your quarters with a cheerful chime and then sit there, cold and silent, mocking you with its refusal to perform its one and only job. It was a lottery, and on that Tuesday, I had decided not to play. I did my laundry in the morning, and seeing the dryer was once again out of order, I simply hung my clothes on a collapsible rack in my living room, resigning myself to a day of damp-smelling air. The rain started in the early afternoon. It wasn't a gentle spring shower, it was a deluge. A thick, gray curtain of water that hammered against my windows and turned the street into a shallow river. I loved days like this. They were the perfect excuse to close myself off from the world entirely, to wrap myself in a blanket and feel utterly justified in my solitude. The sound of the rain was a comforting white noise, a shield. I made a second pot of coffee, settled back at my desk, and felt a sense of peace settle over me. For a few hours, the world outside could take care of itself. I was safe in my fortress, and nothing and no one could possibly get in. Or so I thought. It was around 4 o'clock when the knock came. It was a firm, solid sound, not the timid tap of a delivery person. It was the kind of knock that held a sense of purpose, maybe even a little urgency. My heart gave a stupid, anxious little jump. I rarely had unexpected visitors. In fact, I rarely had expected visitors. I muted my computer, the silence in the apartment suddenly feeling heavy, broken only by the drumming of the rain. I walked to the door, my socked feet silent on the hardwood floor. I peered through the peephole, and my breath hitched in my throat. It was Julian. He was standing in the dim hallway, rain dripping from the ends of his dark hair onto the shoulders of his denim jacket. He was holding a large, blue plastic laundry basket, and it was overflowing with what I could only assume were wet clothes. He looked stressed, his brow furrowed, and for the first time, that effortless confidence I always saw seemed to have deserted him. He looked vulnerable. My hand hesitated on the doorknob. My mind raced through 100 different scenarios. Why was he here? At my door? Was it a noise complaint? Did I leave the water running? Had my existence finally breached the perimeter of his world in some negative way? I took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic hummingbird that had taken up residence in my chest, and opened the door. He looked up, and a wave of relief washed over his face, quickly followed by a hint of embarrassment. "Hey," he said, his voice a little strained. "Sorry to bother you, man. This is a weird question." I just stood there, probably looking like a deer caught in the headlights. "Hi," I managed to say. My own voice sounded thin and unfamiliar. He shifted the weight of the heavy basket in his arms. "So, the dryer downstairs is busted." "Again," he said, rolling his eyes in a way that created an instant, unspoken alliance between us. He gestured vaguely with his head towards his own apartment upstairs. "My place is kind of a mess right now, and I don't really have the space." He finished his plea with a slightly helpless shrug, a gesture so disarming and genuine that it completely shattered the cool, unattainable image I had of him. He was just a guy with a basket of wet clothes, looking for a little help. My brain struggled to catch up with my mouth, which had apparently already decided to be a decent human being. "Oh, yeah, of course. Come in," I said, stepping back to let him pass. He gave me a grateful smile that made my stomach do a slow, lazy flip. "Seriously? Man, you're a lifesaver." "I promise I'll be quick." He shuffled past me into my apartment, and the space was immediately filled with his presence. He brought the scent of rain and damp earth and something else, something uniquely him, a clean, woodsy smell that I instantly wanted to commit to memory. He set the basket down on the floor, and it was only then that I became acutely aware of my own living room. My own damp clothes were hanging neatly on my drying rack by the far wall, a testament to my own recent battle with the basement laundry room. "Looks like you had the same idea," he said, nodding towards my laundry with a small grin. "Yeah, I learned not to trust that dryer a long time ago," I replied, a surprising bit of normalcy in my tone. "Smart man," he said. He looked around my apartment, his eyes taking everything in. My neat stacks of books, the framed prints on the walls, the soft gray sofa. I suddenly saw it all through his eyes. Was it too tidy? Too quiet? Did it scream, "Lonely guy lives here"? "You have a really nice place," he said, his gaze landing back on me. "It's calm." Calm. That was a word for it. I thought of it more as sterile, but I appreciated his kindness. "Thanks," I said. "So, where can we hang this stuff?" I looked at his overflowing basket and then at my already full drying rack. This, right here, was the moment things began to shift. It was a simple, practical problem, but solving it together felt like a collaboration, a small team project. "Let me explain," I found myself saying, a strange new confidence blooming within me. "I think I have an idea." I went to my hall closet and pulled out a coil of nylon rope and a small bag of clothespins I kept for camping. This was my chance to be useful, to be something other than the quiet guy from 2B. Julian watched, intrigued, as I strung the rope from the top of a bookshelf to a sturdy curtain rod, creating a makeshift clothesline that bisected my living room. "Whoa," he said, genuinely impressed. "You were prepared for this." I was an Eagle Scout, I confessed, feeling my cheeks flush. It sounded so nerdy. But Julian just laughed, a warm, genuine sound that bounced off the walls. "Of course you were," he said, but there was no mockery in it. It was affectionate. "That's awesome." And so we began. We fell into an easy, unspoken rhythm. He would pull a damp item from his basket, a pair of jeans, a work shirt, a soft-looking t-shirt, and hand it to me. I would hand him a few clothespins, and he would carefully hang it on the line. The small space was filled with the quiet sounds of our task, the rustle of damp fabric, the gentle snap of the plastic clothespins, the continuous drumming of the rain against the glass. My carefully ordered world was now draped in Julian's life. His clothes, smelling of his laundry detergent, hung in the air all around us. It felt impossibly intimate, a domesticity I had never imagined sharing with anyone, let alone him. I was acutely aware of his proximity, of the way his arm would brush against mine as he reached for the line, of the warmth radiating from his body. Every small, accidental touch sent a jolt through my system. And we talked. It wasn't a stilted, hallway conversation. It was real. I learned that he was a custom furniture maker, which explained the sawdust. He talked about his love for working with wood, the satisfaction of turning a raw slab of maple into a beautiful table. He spoke with a quiet passion that was captivating. I found myself telling him about my work, trying to explain the logic and creativity of coding in a way that didn't sound completely boring. And he listened. He actually listened, asking smart questions and looking me in the eye when I answered. The guy I had imagined, the one-dimensional jock from my daydreams, was fading away. In his place was this person. This thoughtful, funny, slightly clumsy man who was currently trying to hang a pair of socks without dropping a clothespin for the third time. I laughed as it fell to the floor again. You build tables for a living, but you can't handle a clothespin? I teased. He shot me a playful glare. Hey, woodworking requires precision. This is chaos. His smile was wide and unguarded. And in that moment, sharing a laugh over something so silly, surrounded by his wet laundry in my quiet living room, the wall I had built around myself began to feel less like a fortress and more like a cage. As he reached into the basket, he pulled out a thick, navy blue sweater. It was heavy with water. He handled it with a surprising gentleness. Ah, this is the main event, he said, his voice softer now. This was my grandfather's. It's the only one I have left. He looked at the sweater, and for a second, I saw a flash of deep emotion in his eyes, a flicker of grief and love. It was a profound crack in the confident exterior, a glimpse of the history and vulnerability that lay beneath. It was a revelation. He wasn't just the guy upstairs. He was a grandson who missed his grandfather. He was a man who cherished a simple, woolen sweater. It's beautiful, I said, and I meant it. The air was thick with something more than just humidity now. It was charged with this shared moment of vulnerability. He gave me a small, grateful smile and carefully hung the sweater in the center of the line, as if giving it a place of honor. We worked in silence for a few minutes after that, the easy banter replaced by a comfortable quiet. The space between us felt different. It was closer, warmer. We were nearing the bottom of the basket. Just a few t-shirts and a heavy work sweatshirt left. He reached for a gray t-shirt, and as I turned to grab a clothespin, our hands brushed. It wasn't a fleeting, accidental touch like before. This time, his fingers lingered against mine for a split second longer than necessary. It was a tiny hesitation, a minuscule pause in the flow of time, but it sent a shockwave straight through me. I pulled my hand back, my heart hammering against my ribs. I risked a glance at him. He was already looking at me, his dark eyes unreadable. Did he feel it too? Or was I just projecting my own desperate hope onto an innocent gesture? He cleared his throat and looked away, taking the clothespin and turning his attention back to the line. But the air had changed. The question of that touch hung between us, as tangible as the clothes themselves. The simple task we were sharing was no longer just a task. It was something else entirely. And I was terrified and thrilled, and I had no idea what to do next. We finished hanging the last of the t-shirts, and only one item remained in the blue basket. A thick, hooded sweatshirt, dark green and faded from wear. It was soaking wet, clearly the heaviest thing of all. All right, the grand finale, Julian said, his voice a little strained, as if he felt the same tension I did. He picked it up, and water dripped onto the hardwood floor. Here, I said, grabbing a towel from my own laundry rack and tossing it on the floor to catch the drips. It was a purely practical gesture, but it felt like an act of care. He looked around, trying to find a good spot for the heavy garment. The makeshift line was sagging under the weight of his other clothes. Maybe, up there, he said, pointing to the end of the curtain rod, which was the highest point. It might get more air. You'll need a chair, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor I felt inside. I pulled one of my dining chairs over and placed it under the spot. Julian stepped onto the chair, the old wood creaking slightly under his weight. He was closer to the ceiling now, and I had to crane my neck to look up at him. He stretched his arms high, the muscles in his back and shoulders pulling taut against the fabric of his shirt as he wrestled the heavy, damp sweatshirt over the rod. He was so focused on his task, his brow furrowed in concentration. I just stood there, holding the now empty laundry basket, feeling utterly useless and completely mesmerized. As he finally settled the sweatshirt into place, a stream of cold water ran down his outstretched arm, dripping from his elbow onto his face. He flinched, letting out a soft hiss of surprise. He shook his head, sending droplets flying, and then he laughed. It was a quiet, self-deprecating laugh. He wiped at his cheek with the back of his hand, but it just smeared the water around. Without thinking, I reached out with the dish towel that was still slung over my shoulder from doing my morning dishes. "Here," I said softly. He looked down at me, and his laughter died in his throat. His eyes were dark and serious. He was still standing on the chair, which put us at an odd, intimate angle. I was looking up at him, my arm extended with the towel. He hesitated for a long moment, his gaze fixed on mine. Then, slowly, he reached down and took the towel from my hand. Our fingers brushed again, and this time, neither of us pulled away immediately. The contact was electric, a current that seemed to flow directly from his skin to mine, bypassing my brain and heading straight for my heart. He dabbed his face with the towel, his movements slow and deliberate, his eyes never leaving mine. The entire world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of us in my living room, surrounded by his drying clothes, with the sound of the rain as the only witness. The air was thick with unspoken words, with questions and possibilities that I had never dared to entertain before. He finished drying his face and held the towel for a moment before letting his arm drop to his side. "Thanks," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm outside. He stepped down from the chair. He didn't step away. He stepped closer. We were standing inches apart, the empty laundry basket a flimsy barrier between us. I could feel the warmth of his body, smell the clean scent of his soap mixed with the petrichor of the rain. I could have moved. I should have moved. I should have taken a step back, created some space, said something light and casual to break the spell. But I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, held captive by the intensity in his gaze. This was it. This was the precipice of something. I could feel it in the way my blood hummed, in the frantic beating of my own heart. "Well," he said, his voice low and a little rough. "That's everything." He gestured vaguely at the clothesline that now dominated my apartment. "I really appreciate this, Lucas. You really, really saved me." "It's no problem," I managed to choke out. The words felt ridiculously inadequate. He nodded, but he didn't move to leave. He just kept looking at me, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. It was the same conflict I felt warring inside myself. The desire to lean in versus the instinct to pull back. Hope versus fear. My entire life, fear had always won. I had always chosen the safe retreat. But then Julian did something that changed everything. He reached out and gently took the laundry basket from my hands, setting it quietly on the floor beside us. He removed the last barrier. And then, instead of stepping back, he took another small step forward. He was so close now I could see the tiny flecks of gold in his brown eyes. He raised a hand, not to my shoulder, not to my arm, but to my cheek. His calloused fingertips were surprisingly soft against my skin. It was a question, a gentle, tentative inquiry. And I answered. I leaned into his touch, just a fraction of an inch, but it was enough. A small sigh escaped his lips, a sound of relief, of release. And then he said the 6 words that completely undid me. He hung them up, he murmured, his gaze dropping to my lips for a heartbeat. And then he pulled me down. It wasn't a question. It was a story. A story he was telling me. A story he wanted to happen. My breath caught in my throat. He was giving me the script. He was telling me what he wanted. He wanted me to be brave. So I was. I closed the remaining distance between us and pressed my lips to his. It wasn't a perfect kiss. It was clumsy and hesitant at first, a collision of uncertainty and desperate longing. But then he responded, his other hand coming up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my skin. He kissed me back with a gentle insistence that melted all my fear away. It was a kiss that tasted of rain and hope and the thrilling, terrifying promise of a new beginning. We stood there, in the middle of my living room, under a canopy of his damp clothes, and for the first time, I didn't feel like an observer in my own life. I felt like I was finally, truly in it. The kiss ended as gently as it began. We pulled apart slowly, resting our foreheads together. My eyes were still closed, my world still spinning. I could hear the ragged sound of my own breathing, mingled with his. The rain was a soft patter now, the storm outside having passed its peak, mirroring the calm that was slowly settling over the tempest inside me. Wow, Julian breathed out, the word a warm puff of air against my lips. I opened my eyes. He was looking at me with an expression of such open, raw vulnerability that it stole the air from my lungs. The confident, easygoing guy from upstairs was gone, replaced by this man who looked as shaken and hopeful as I felt. Yeah, I whispered back. Wow, he let out a shaky laugh. I've been wanting to do that for a while, he admitted, his voice quiet and thick with emotion. My mind reeled. A while, I asked, incredulous. I thought you barely knew I existed. Are you kidding? He said, pulling back just enough to look me fully in the face. His hands moved from my face to my shoulders, his grip warm and grounding. Lucas, I knew. I knew the brand of coffee you drink because I can smell it in the hall some mornings. I know you work from home and you listen to classical music in the afternoons. I know you're the one who leaves birdseed out on the fire escape for the sparrows. Each detail he listed was a small, smooth stone dropped into the churning pool of my anxiety, calming it, clearing it. He saw me. He had been seeing me all along, just as I had been seeing him. We had been two people watching each other from behind our respective windows, each too afraid to be the first one to knock on the door. My dryer isn't totally broken, by the way, he confessed, a sheepish grin spreading across his face. It's been acting up, sure, but I probably could have waited. When I saw the storm start, and I knew you were home, I figured it was now or never. It was a stupid, roundabout excuse to talk to you. Relief and a dizzying sort of joy washed over me. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was intentional. He had wanted this, too. He had engineered this entire, ridiculous, wonderful scenario just to be here, in my apartment. The awkwardness I had felt for weeks, the tension in the hallway. It wasn't just me. It had been him, too, navigating his own hope and fear. I couldn't help but laugh, a real, unburdened sound. So you used your grandfather's precious sweater as bait? I teased. He winced playfully. Okay, when you say it like that, it sounds bad. But yes, I did. Was it worth it? He asked, his expression turning serious again, his eyes searching mine for an honest answer. Yeah, I said, my voice full of a certainty that felt brand new. It was worth it. And I kissed him again. This time, there was no hesitation, no clumsiness. It was a kiss of mutual understanding, of shared relief. It was a confirmation, a beginning. All the unspoken tension, all the overthinking, all the lonely nights I'd spent wondering what if, it all melted away in that moment. There was only the solid reality of him in my arms, the quiet of my apartment, and the promise of what came next. We didn't move for a long time. We just stood there, holding each other, making up for months of missed opportunities and silent observation. Eventually, he pulled away, his smile soft. I should probably go let you have your apartment back, he said, though he made no real move to leave. No, I said, the word coming out faster and more firmly than I expected. Don't. Stay. We can order a pizza or something. The offer felt monumental, a leap into a future I hadn't even dared to dream of just hours before. Julian's smile widened. It reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that made my chest ache with affection. I'd like that, he said. I'd like that a lot. He stayed. We ordered pizza and sat on my sofa, tucked under a blanket while his clothes dripped silently around us. The makeshift clothesline, which had felt like such an invasion of my space, now felt like a banner celebrating our strange and perfect beginning. We talked for hours, filling in the gaps of the lives we had only glimpsed from afar. We talked until the rain stopped completely and the moon cast a pale, watery light through the window. When it was finally time for him to go, he stood at the door, and for a moment, a flicker of the old awkwardness returned. What were the new rules? How did this work? He solved the problem by leaning in and giving me a soft, lingering kiss. I'll see you tomorrow, he asked. It wasn't the polite, neighborly question of before. It was a promise. Definitely, I said, a grin spreading across my face that I couldn't have contained if I tried. I watched him walk down the hall and take the stairs up to his apartment. I listened to the sound of his familiar footsteps on the ceiling above me, but for the first time, they didn't sound distant. They sounded like home. I closed my door and leaned against it, breathing in the lingering scent of him, of rain, and of his laundry detergent. My quiet, orderly fortress was a mess, draped in another man's life, and it had never felt more perfect. The next few weeks felt like waking up from a long, gray dream into a world of vibrant color. The tentative connection we forged under that clothesline blossomed into something real and sturdy. Our first official date was a walk in the park the following weekend, under a sky that had been washed clean by the storm. It was simple, and it was perfect. We held hands, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. His apartment, which I had imagined so many times, was nothing like I thought. It wasn't a messy bachelor pad. It was warm and lived in, filled with beautiful, handcrafted furniture he had made himself. Sketches and blueprints were tacked to the walls, evidence of a creative mind and skilled hands. And my apartment ceased to be just my fortress. It became our space, a place for late-night talks on the sofa, for cooking dinner together, for just existing in the same room in a comfortable, easy silence. The hallways were no longer a source of anxiety. They became a place for stolen kisses when we thought no one was looking. The sounds from his apartment, the music, the footsteps, were no longer a mystery. They were just Julian, living his life alongside mine. We were building something together, piece by piece, conversation by conversation, like one of his beautiful tables. A few months later, on a lazy Sunday morning, we were in my kitchen making coffee. It was a bright, sunny day, and a breeze was drifting through the open window. Julian came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder as I poured the water. "You know," he said, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "I was thinking, that's a dangerous pastime," I joked. He chuckled, tightening his hold. "I was thinking that we have way too many clotheslines in our lives." He was referring, of course, to the fact that his clothes often ended up on my drying rack and mine on his. And too many sets of keys. And too many apartments for two people. I turned in his arms to face him, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "What are you suggesting, Julian?" He smiled, that soft, genuine smile that still made my stomach flip. "I'm suggesting we consolidate. Pick one, mine or yours, and make it ours." Looking at him then, with the morning sun lighting up his hair and his eyes full of a future he was offering to share with me, there was no hesitation. There was no fear. There was only a profound sense of rightness, of coming home to a place I hadn't even known I was searching for. I never expected my life to change so suddenly. I had been content, or so I told myself, to watch the world from a safe distance. But love doesn't always announce itself with trumpets and fanfare. Sometimes, it knocks on your door on a rainy Tuesday, holding a basket of wet clothes and a ridiculous excuse. Sometimes, you have to be willing to let the storm in, to let your orderly world be turned upside down. You just have to be brave enough to open the door.